Right. Welcome back to another episode to Founder's Diary. I'm your host, Poonam Premnath. And today we're actually having a conversation about a stage of life that can bring many changes at once, be it our health, careers, relationships, responsibility, even how we see ourselves. So, my guest today is Vaishali Joshi. She's a mental agility coach, mental health speaker, and founder of ORA Human and BeyondBold. Vaishali brings more than 20 years of corporate leadership experience across 8 different industries in global business transformation. So, with her, through her signature Aura Human experience, she helps professionals, entrepreneurs build mental agility to navigate stress, change. She's also the founder of BeyondBold, Midlife Women's Health and Wellbeing Education platform, which is created to address an important gap in how we understand and support women through the stage of life. So today we're going to go beyond any single conversation about either hormones, careers, relationships to explore what really happens when everything seems to be changing at once. How women navigate their midlife shifts with greater awareness, confidence, and clarity. Vaishali, welcome to the Founders Diary podcast. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Poonam. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So I'll get dive right into the questions here. So usually when we talk about midlife, it sounds like it's like one transition, but for many women, everything happens everything at once. You have your marriage, you have your children, you have your hormones, you have your career, you have parenting, you have several different competing interests and priorities that come about. So what do you think is really happening for women during this stage of life?
I like how you said people or women rather perceive this as being one transition. And the best way for me to describe how it is so complex is like, when you sit in a movie and there's a movie scene going on and there's a backdrop, always, there's a context. As we say, context is everything. But we are always focused on the people that are in the forefront. We're involved in the dialogue, the characters, the action that's happening in the forefront. And what I describe this transition to look like is like the backdrop. So it is the
Mhm.
backdrop or the context, which essentially, when you think about it, is the biggest thing in the scene. And yet it is the least seen and considered or planned around. And I felt
Mhm.
that there's this silent thing happening in the background while a number of things carry on in our lives, and we're just invested in what's happening in the foreground. And so if I may just play that out for you for a second here, you got, by the time you're 11 and up, you've now started to get used to having your period every month and building your lifestyle and changing your lifestyle and becoming more mindful about that cycle. And so while you're doing that, of course, you're out there to be someone in the world, you're studying, you're trying to get all those qualifications under your belt, you're learning how to be self-sufficient. And then whereas just as you're getting past that, you layer on from 25 to maybe 40 years old, you're like getting into your career progression journey. You're starting to think about, okay, I got my qualifications. Where do I want to go with this? And how do I get ahead in this? And then I'm learning to find my partner. I'm learning to get married. I'm learning to become more adult, the mortgage, etc. That hasn't even kind of passed over, and layering on top of that, and I call these layers because they are actually overlapping, is this
Right.
period of 35 to 50 when women, it's almost like 2 decades long, going through perimenopause. So some women have barely come out of their pregnancy years when they hit this period. And thus we see yet right now a lot of infertility rates. And so here's the time where naturally, whether you like it or not, you're going to start to see a decline, maybe physically, maybe emotionally, maybe cognitively. And then there's a lot more noise around us because we're trying to raise our children, we're trying to be mothers, and if they're teens, that's even louder. We are now starting to look after our parents more. We are that generation. And our career might be peaking at this time. We're like getting where we want to get, but it's like juggling all these things at once. So, as you can see in this journey, there's this backdrop that keeps getting more and more intense, and
Mhm.
yet we are still focused on the foreground. And so I feel even after 50, kids leave home. Maybe they don't these days, Now we're involved in our kids' self-sufficiency. Are they settled? Are they self-sufficient? So
Mhm.
what I say is that throughout this process is this long, silent, slow process of disconnection from self. And it's not that we aren't doing all the right things, it's just that we don't either have the capacity, or we're just too busy involved in the foreground, in the doing. And slowly we completely lose sight of who am I? What did I want to be? What do I want? Am I happy? Where do I go now? What's my purpose? A lot of women get overwhelmed with these big questions somewhere between 45 and 55 as they
Mm-hmm.
start to see that I'm not feeling very happy. I'm not feeling
Mm-hmm.
very healthy. The things that used to give me happiness don't now. And so that disconnection from within then starts to emanate to the
Mm-hmm.
rest of their lives, and it starts to turn into disconnection with others. And so I always look at this layering of what's happening biologically with everything that we're trying to aspire to do in such a short time frame.
Mm-hmm. I love the fact that you mention these are layers, and the way you beautifully put all these layers in a simplified way, because a lot of what you're telling right now is happening inside people's mind, and not everyone is comfortable sharing all of it out loud, let alone getting to a place of asking for support. So there's a lot of mental agility that people have to navigate quietly on their own. And I love the fact that you have creating a forum where these conversations are out in the open and you're normalizing some of these things, right? So what does, like, let's talk, I know you're a mental agility coach, so let's touch on that a little bit. So what does that look like for women in midlife? So when she's trying to manage all these changes, as you said, at the same time, there's physical changes happening in your body as well. And you're navigating that responsibility between work and home. So why don't we touch on that?
Yeah. I think the first thing I want to share is what is mental agility, because if you're a person who works in the corporate arena, being adaptable is a term that is being used over and over and has been for decades, that you have to be adaptable. And that means that as the company changes and as our context changes, the world changes, you also have to be someone who continues to evolve with your skill sets that you offer to that organization. Mental agility, I describe as human skill. Things like resilience, things like mental agility, curiosity, these are not your typical soft skills that we used to learn when we were earlier and say, like, develop your soft skills, which is like something like your communication skills, for example. But mental agility is a human skill. And I call it a human skill because it is something that can be learned, it can be developed,
Mhm.
and it can be mastered. And what it is the ability to think clearly, finding clarity, and adapting to a situation in the present moment, and being
Mhm.
able to still stay open to other ways of doing things. Now that's agility, right? There's one way you think something should be done, but even in a moment of urgency, if you're able to still listen and hear out other people's ways of solving problems or dealing with the unexpected, then there is this sense of I am open to other
Mhm.
ways of thinking. Now that
Mhm.
mental agility for women particularly is very highly tied to your emotional agility. And so that's why I always say to women or to people who do the program with me is that developing emotional agility is the first step before you can become mentally agile. And so
Right.
emotional agility is the ability to actually use your emotional intelligence with greater flex. How flexibly are you able to use your emotional intelligence?
Mhm.
Now, that could be a psychological capacity so that you can experience your thoughts and feelings without feeling like they are in the driver's seat.
Right.
So
Right.
I always say emotional agility comes before mental agility, because if you can't self regulate your emotions first and you can't actually be flexible in the way that you leverage your emotions, then your thought processes, your faculties, your cognitive faculties to be mentally agile have no voice.
Right.
Now, let's talk about women when they're going through perimenopause. I mean, we all know that our cognitive ability is naturally declining. Our ability to problem solve, our ability to be awake in the morning and sharp in the morning is being greatly affected. And yet we are being asked to be mentally agile. So this
Right.
becomes a challenge that, how do I remain adaptable and open to other ways of thinking when all I'm feeling is a sense of panic when I wake up in the morning and go to the workplace? Some ways that women can actually start to show mental agility is by simply observing their emotions, which is, and a great way to do that is have a practice of detachment. I call it healthy detachment every day, being able to withdraw from the external and
Mm-hmm.
having a discipline to be able to say, I can see myself from the outside. Now, this is a skill you develop, and you develop it through discipline. And then you start to see that, hey, it's okay if something is done a certain way. I'm willing to let my way go. So
Mm-hmm.
flexibility, people who are mentally agile tend to show that they're able to change their mind and their approach when they see new facts. When they're mentally agile, they can process new information without getting stuck in those old habits. They're able to ask questions first before stating where they stand.
Right.
And I think that these behaviors are things that not just women, but even men are struggling with in the workplaces and in their homes, given the pressures that we are all living under.
Right. Right. No, this is a really good point that you made, Vaishali, because I think the heart of all of this is awareness. Most times we're not aware and we're not even taught some of these things in terms of how to use some of these faculties so we can think clearly and recognize what are aspects that don't really need resonate with us anymore, right? This is where we need to ask ourselves. So, how do you think we can know when we need to adapt rather than simply just push harder? And then sometimes we are trying to be the person that we were 10 years ago. So, how do we help ourselves with that?
Yeah, I think that was, that point of coming to the point where you understand that the stuff that I used to do isn't working. The way that I
Right.
used to respond to this situation isn't working. For me, I know personally was this big moment this year, particularly of, all right, my old ways of doing things are not working. And so those old ways not working was a big message for me to say, all right, now you better come up with a different plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ways you recognize this is that when your desired outcomes stop materializing, when your
Mm-hmm.
body or your mind starts rendering your normal routine as being abnormal. And I'll give you an example. I'm a wake up all my life, wake up at 5 a.m. person, sometimes even earlier, without any kind of trouble. Get
Mm-hmm.
up because I really prioritize my practice time in the morning, my alone time, my mindfulness morning. I've always been that person. And this year I
Mm-hmm.
had to reinvent my entire routine because I realized that my body was naturally telling me that my circadian system is not the same, my rhythm is not the same, and I need the sleep.
Right.
And that was a hard thing because I got really hard on myself. I'm like, what do you mean you're not going to get out of bed at 5 o'clock? What do you mean you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to get out and get to that class or whatever it is that you do in the morning, or you're not going to sit down and do, like, it was really like I beat myself about it. You
Mm-hmm.
know that a new way is needed and that this old person needs to shed this skin and become a new person when you start to find certain behaviors changing. Some of them you have to embrace and say, okay, fine, I wake up at 6 now.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I will make time for this somewhere else.
Right.
And maybe there will be the odd morning I can still do 5. But
Mm-hmm.
for that, I have to do the following things the night before.
Right.
I found myself, losing it and like losing my temper or expressing myself harshly more than normal. The
Mm-hmm.
frequency of that was higher. And my,
Right.
and my choice of language was sometimes unrecognizable to even me.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's when I,
No.
I, I started like, who is this person? Why did I even express myself that way? And I wouldn't have before. Or you're in this room full of people, like someone's talking to you and you literally feel like you're not there. I used to be that person this year as well. So it was this, as you say, awareness. A lot of people don't know that that's not me. They just carry on. But for me, there was this awareness that there was a lot of behavioral changes happening, some all built around a sort of, I will put the big word, reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to notice that I was having more and more conflict with the people I care about the most, and that I had a part in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
realization and that understanding, particularly with my son, when it comes to our children, we wake up very quickly. Um,
Right.
this was when I woke up and I said, all right, this is when I have to stop and I need to be learn to be kinder and step away from that day to day and accept this new normal. Accept this new normal, understand it, make friends with it, verbalize it,
Mm-hmm.
communicate it with my son, communicate it with my husband, seek understanding, get educated. I wasn't.
Right,
So
right.
I sought the education and I shared the education with my family.
Hmm.
And then they began to understand why in the morning she just doesn't want to have a heavy conversation until it's 8 a.m.
Right.
Right? Please don't get me into the what's the pickup drop off? What are we doing for dinner? Like, let's not start that at like 7 in the morning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? Whereas before they used to think you're dismissing me, you're ignoring me. So I think that this here is about you getting educated, about you learning to accept that a new normal is not necessarily a bad normal. It's just a new normal. It's a
Right.
different version.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. The example that you shared in terms of how do you uh, set the stage for the day. It's setting the right meaningful boundaries, and I think a lot of it is being trained on how to be present. You won't know how to be present if there's background noise happening and there's a mental chatter that you haven't figured out yet. And some of the training is what you provide in your program. And as you speak about layers, when all of this is happening, we're also at the peak of our careers and experiences professionally, right? So that's when things get harder at that point. So let's talk a little bit about workplaces, right? How
Mhm.
do women handle this in workplaces? And I'm sure there's misunderstandings about things like this. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, lots, but I'll keep it to the question. I now give my keynote around this because I just find that I was that 40 something year old woman that was bustling from meeting room to meeting room, watching some women leave meeting rooms in the middle of an important presentation and never come back. And then I would go looking for them afterwards, going, where did you go? Like, we couldn't have just, you can't just go like that. And finding them locked up in their offices, maybe change their clothes, maybe reapplying their makeup, maybe just washing their face for the sixth time that day.
Mm-hmm.
And me not feeling like I understood that because I wasn't experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I was doing other things with my health conversation and maybe they were not. I don't know, but I
Mm-hmm.
always felt like I wasn't present with them at that time. And so recently, I have to tell you, I was in a restaurant at dinner with my husband, and we sat down at this table, and next to us was this group of like 6, 7 people that, and you could tell that they all worked together and they'd come for an after work
Mm-hmm.
dinner. And there was 2 men at that table, and there were like 4 women. And they, interestingly enough, the only reason I eavesdropped was because the word menopause came up. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the conversation was, I'm really glad that so and so came to speak to us about menopause because, we don't talk about it at work. I wasn't listening to my husband at that point. I was like, I need to hear this. So,
Yes, of
and so
course.
it was really interesting to hear women openly at a dinner table talk to their coworkers who are men, finally feeling it's permissible because someone came to train them in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is still, unfortunately, a very rare thing. And the
Mm-hmm.
men then starting to feel in this at this dinner table that they too could start talking about their wives at this table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is conversation that used to be a nothing conversation before. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the stats are staggering today. Today 75% of women in North America and Canada have reported that their workplaces do not address any such transition in their health, that they
Right.
themselves also don't feel empowered with the right education, but that in their workplaces it is masked, it is not talked
Mm-hmm.
about. 70% of these women are also 70 is a big number, are showing that mental health challenges are the first and most important challenge that they struggle with on a daily basis. So you think about those female workers who are coming to work with mental health challenges and that number being that high.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the majority of workplaces still believe that this is a personal medical thing that their female talent must handle on their own, and that
Mm-hmm.
women must continue to perform at the same or better level with no needed accommodation for the drastic change that is happening in between the ages of 35 and 55.
Right.
And
No.
if you're like me at 35 to 40, this is when I felt like my trajectory career-wise was like on a real rise, on a very steep ascent.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this greater expectation on you because you've done well so far, and now you're really aiming for that next level. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't want anyone to perceive weakness in you. You're already competing with men for the same role. So
Right,
we're
right.
very prone. We come from cultures as well where our mother's like, well, I did it, so you will too. Right?
Right.
So we're wired this way, and then we're in an environment that doesn't talk about it, and then we're competing alongside people who don't go through what we go through. And
Right.
thus,
Right.
I sit here and I go, our organizations have a responsibility to make sure that they are creating more learning pathways around not just perimenopause, but in mental wellness in general.
Right.
And that's not a workshop once in a while that I called a guest speaker. I was at a podcast yesterday and we talked about how we develop learning development pathways for people. It's not just you're an engineer, so the next step for you technically is this. But hey, here's a human skill development path that you is just as important as the technical stuff you do. And some of
Right.
this has to do with self-regulation,
Mhm.
self-awareness, other
Mhm.
awareness, because those are the
Mhm.
things that dictate how you interact with people in the workplace.
Yes. And speaking of people, the people that get impacted the most are the ones that are closest to you. And so I want to transition now into things that people don't tend to see. Like in a work environment, it's very easy. It's black and white. It's performance, right?
Hmm.
But that performance has layers to it in terms of how you as a person, Vaishali, it impacts your marriage, your family. There's tough conversations you're navigating at home, a relationship with your partner, your children. These are all the folks that are very close to you. Some people are even navigating things like divorce and loss of a parent, grief, so many other aspects that come about. And part of mental agility is to navigate all of those things. So why don't you share a little bit from your perspective, what's going on when women have to navigate all of these things in addition to maintaining peak performance?
Yeah, I think this was a very personal experience for me this year, where my family went through these changes first at not knowing what they were about, and then starting to learn what they were about, and then starting to change their own behaviors around me after feeling like they understood what was happening. And so I will speak from my personal experience. We've already talked about this layering and those demands and the declining self connection. But what I experienced through this is that there was a lot of unnecessary strife that happened because all of us were in the not know. All of us didn't know because I was that person who traditionally has always juggled many balls up in the air,
Hmm.
usually gracefully. And so that expectation was there. So when I start doing things like you know forgetting things, I start forgetting that someone told me something, or I forget places I've been at. I can't remember what I said to this person. It would cause
Hmm.
strife. Small things would become big things, like I'm going to the office. Well, I didn't know you were going to the office. Well, I told you yesterday. I was like, oh, you know, you didn't. Right. And then
Right.
we'd argue because that person thinks I'm not paying attention to them, and I'm kind of thinking, no, I'm not losing my mind.
Hmm.
So I couldn't remember some things that I'd been told, and that would lead to bigger, as I said, unnecessary strife. I began to step away from any high pressure decision making types of conversations in the morning, but that was the only time my husband and I could really communicate before the workday started.
Right.
So when I would shy away from those, there was this, well, we got to resolve this. So one person wants to back away and the other person just wants to keep going at it.
Hmm.
The fact that they saw me not get up and run out the house at 6 a.m. and do my thing and come back and be full of energy, or I didn't even want to watch TV after work. I literally didn't want to
Hmm.
look at another screen because my eyelids were hurting, which was another whole journey I talk about, is people didn't know that my eyelids were hurting because of there being no estrogen.
Oh,
So I was
wow.
sent
Hmm.
down many pathways. That's a whole other podcast on the many pathways I was sent down in my 40s because I reported certain symptoms. And the choices and the procedures and the medications that were given to me because I had one-off symptoms that all had to be looked at more holistically. All to say, I started spending less time with my family in the evenings. I wanted to withdraw. They weren't used to
Hmm.
that. They were like, she
Hmm.
comes out of her office, she comes home, she rolls her sleeves up, she's in the kitchen, she's got dinner, she's like, none of this was happening anymore. And so I think the family routines getting disrupted in for women, it also leads to a real digression in relationships. And I know with my teenager, him going through his massive hormonal changes that he naturally would, and me going through them at the same time, it was fireworks like FIFA style. Okay. It was like my
Right,
husband taking cover. Or every day I was like, oh, here they go again, you know.
right,
So the
right.
distance grew this year, and we are now recovering from that. And there's less fear of conflict, whereas the fear of conflict was so high when all this was happening. People were withdrawing, they were afraid to speak up. People are afraid
Mhm.
to put more things on other people's desks. Psychological safety in our homes is compromised at a time like this. So it really takes two people, the husband
Mhm.
and the wife, to be educated about what is this, what's going to happen, how are we going to deal with it, and then go into it with their eyes open. And then help the children navigate through that. I have a happy story to end with. This is to say that my 15-year-old son came home one day and said, "We learned about menopause at school today."
Oh, wow.
And I looked at him and I'm like, "Seriously?" He says, "Yeah, I kind of understand why you're doing what you're doing." Of course, he was being funny as well, but
Right,
but
right.
they taught it, and I want my son to grow up like I want every boy and girl to grow up knowing that this is coming for their
Mhm.
partners, for themselves. And the night he came to me, finally, when I had been assessed properly and I had been treated properly, and I was on some other regime now altogether, that he came at night and has said, "Hey, mom, did you take your progesterone?"
Oh, wow.
And I remember that day because I remember that whole journey getting to that day. And
Right,
that's
right,
why I really strongly advocate for, Beyond Bold is all about education. And people may think,
right.
well, there's lots of education out there. Look, I'm on Instagram. And I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't what we're trying to do here is create a completely different generation of women and men who go in even before they get married and have this conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, speaking of education, I want to dive a little bit deeper into that aspect as well. I know you mentioned you've done corporate leadership for at least 20 years now, and you've created ORA Human Experience, now the Beyond Bold. I've actually attended one of your Beyond Bold events. That was your debut one in Tampa. I really enjoyed it. I highly encourage women in their journey to go experience what Vaishali has created through Beyond Bold. And I think you have one coming up in Canada as well very soon. So,
Yes.
what I want to do here is I know you spoke about your own journey. Let's touch a little bit about, what can someone learn from this experience through you? And, you know, the goal obviously here is to help them create a sustainable life. So how are you helping them through this?
Um, I think my program, which I started 3 years ago, which has been taught to working professionals, um, has really informed me about the huge gap in our society and in our workplace around the human education that we don't get and we don't give our own kids. So when we want our children, when they're young, we kind of go, you got to focus. You're not focusing. If you focus, we keep using words like this that they kind of go, okay, how do I do this? As they get older, the words get bigger. There's you need to be more resilient. Okay, what does that look like? And
Right.
innately, because we have been raised to get tougher and tougher, they're looking at us getting tougher and tougher, and they're learning what does tough look like.
Exactly.
And so I feel that today we really need to teach our youngsters, but also ourselves, how we need to reinvent ourselves to redefine what resilient means. And so when you want to do that, you really have to self-examine and say, all right, if I want to redefine resilience, then I'm going to have to make
Hmm.
some tough choices between what I value and how much you want to navigate your health journey. How much do you value your health?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and why do you value your health? If you are someone where your value system, is about money, wealth, material success,
Hmm.
and then you know that your focus on that is going to lead to places where you and your family may have disease of some kind, some ailment, some toxicity, then If you think that that is your value system and resilient means keep getting resilient in the space of wealth and material success, that means that something's got to give. And you're
Mm-hmm.
basically saying that I don't need to display that level of resilience when it comes to my health and my family.
Mm-hmm.
So if we define resilience as lasting in toxic environments and continuing to have success in making money, we agree to allowing that damage that is done to ourselves and our family.
Mm-hmm.
So resilience is not an easy thing to redefine. Now, if we are willing to say that I can draw clear boundaries around that toxic exposure, and I have a discipline in place for countering the damage that it is causing me. I am still working in that environment. I go to it, but I have built systems around that actually offset that toxicity. And I've got clear boundaries around my time and energy when it comes to my exposure to it. Now you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to redefine resilience,
Right.
right? So what does that take? It takes awareness, as you said, but it also takes courage to let go of some things that you think that if you can't let go of that salary or that next level, then you're just resigning yourself to that same cycle of toxicity. So I've learned, interestingly enough, by letting go of that wheel 3 years ago. I walked away from probably I will say somewhere at the height of my career. I should have probably just sunsetted there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But people ask me, like, how did you didn't even do this part-time? You just kind of, well, I'd of course planned for that financially. I knew that that was what I wanted to do. But what I've learned over 3 years of letting go of that is that whenever I have now chosen to prioritize my health in exchange for those extra dollars and those accolades, I have become far more creative,
Mm-hmm.
resourceful, and productive on the work front. And so work now for me has been completely redefined.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is that type of courage it takes to redefine what I mean resilient. Resilience is actually softer. And the softer kind of resilience is sustainable, the other is not. But I will speak to so many people around me, even in my family, who don't understand this language.
So I'm glad you mentioned the fact that people don't understand this language because we need to give them some type of a vision to hold on to, right? What does it look like when we give ourselves the permission to consciously choose and decide what we want for the next chapter, right? What does that look like? Let's do some vision casting here so people know what to expect.
Yes. Um, I think I live with less fear.
Mhm.
The fear factor is muted when I started redefining my resilience.
Mhm.
When I started taking the steps that prioritized sustainable well-being and having a practice of resilience that was sustainable, I began to notice how much less I was involved in the sphere of fear. So approaching our life every day with the fear of. When we're children, we're fear of our parents getting mad at us, our teachers, of failing, of so on. We are indoctrinated into the conversation of fear. And so as we get older and we go into the workplace, we're fearful of losing our jobs. We're fearful of circumstances change us. We're not needed anymore. Our boss, we're fearful of, upsetting them. We're fearful of so many things. We're fearful of not fitting in, and
Right.
this fear conversation is what takes up so much of our energy and our brain capacity. It's hard to
Right.
be creative and resourceful and free in our thinking and be mentally agile when we're absorbed in the fear. So for me, this looks like feeling more self-assured,
Mhm.
trusting that even if you fail, um, it's not going to be the end of life. That you have this silent confidence that you will recover and that you
Mhm.
will not be abandoned.
Mhm.
Um, and when I operate with that level of resilience, feeling like it's okay if I messed up, that's okay. Tomorrow we'll do it this way. And there's this continuity of possibility
Right.
that we're not open to when we're stuck or locked up in a place of resilient means just buckle down and do the needed. And I have to stick this out because of what
Mhm.
might break if I change
Mhm.
things.
That's wonderful, Vaishali. Thank you so much. That was actually my last question before I start the rapid fire round. So I'm just gonna shoot some questions at you, and you tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. What do you think is one thing every woman should know when she reaches midlife?
Hmm. I think I would want them to know that they're just starting to become the woman they were meant to be.
Okay. Something a woman needs to stop feeling guilty about when they reach midlife.
Taking care of themselves and not feeling guilty about looking more deeply at themselves and trying to change themselves.
Beautiful. One thing partners need to understand better.
Silence is golden. I really think that partners, when they don't know what they're contending with, um, they educated, get educated, create a safe space, create a safe space for this transition to happen for your wife or your girlfriend or whoever, right? Understand the need for psychological safety is greater now more than ever.
That was such a beautiful point that you made, which is so underrated and not talked about enough, I feel. So, the next question for you is complete the sentence. A mentally agile woman is.
Someone who has lots and lots of different identities and is still uncovering more and more identities about herself.
Oh, wonderful. And then the last one says complete the sentence. The best thing about getting older is.
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. The best thing about getting older is that you get wiser about where to invest your energy.
Like that. I like that. And thank you, Vaishali, for such a beautiful conversation. And if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way do you think that they can stay connected with you?
I am on LinkedIn and on Insta and on Facebook at Shine with Vishali. So that's my handle for all three of them. And other than that, you can even just Google Beyond Bold Toronto, which is coming up, by the way, on September 13th. Our next full day retreat after two in Tampa that were so foundational to where I am now. And so if
Mhm.
you just even Google Beyond Bold Toronto, you'll see a webpage show up and you can see all of our contact details there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Vaishali. This was such a thoughtful conversation. And the one thing I hope folks listening to this conversation, they take away is that midlife is not just one change happening in isolation. It's multitude of things, the layers as we talked about. It's your bodies, careers, relationships, family, sense of self. Everything is interconnected, and the opportunity here isn't simply to push through this chapter, but mainly to get back to who we once were. Right? It's about understanding ourselves, giving permission to ourselves to look at things differently and be intentional about where we want to go next. And I'm really glad, Vaishali, that you're doing all of this through your platform, ORA Human and Beyond Bold. And thank you for doing this. And I'm excited to see what comes about in your Beyond Bold journey in Canada. And for everyone else listening, please, when you get a chance, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who may need to hear it. That's the best way you can pay forward. And for more conversations around clarity, leadership, navigating changes that shape who we become, please follow me at Radiate in a Harmony. And unless you want to say anything before I end the conversation.
I want to say thank you. And I love this conversation. I think we share a lot of common interests, but I want to say, Poonam, you are also part of, by doing podcasts like this and in your own way, you're also paving the path for others to feel safe, to make the due changes in their lives. So I'm really grateful that you've experienced Beyond Bold, that we've crossed paths, and that we are continuing to speak about these things.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vaishali. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and talking more about everything that you have to share with us.
All right.
Okay?
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye for now.